everyone, this is Joe from Scarecrow Joe's Studio. Welcome back to part 6 of our paper mache troll tutorial. We're going to finish the sculpt today. But before we get into that, because I think this section of the tutorial is going to be a short one. So before we get into that, I wanted to show you a couple of the other tutorials that I'm working on for you right now. One of them is a Killer Clown Jack-o'-lantern tutorial. So that one's coming up. And then also a paper mache bat tutorial. So right now I am working on both of those tutorials for you. But in the meantime, let's get back to this one. Okay, for this section of the tutorial, you're obviously going to need your troll. You're going to need some paper mache paste, your paper mache clay. You're going to need your little axe that you created and strip mached and is dry. You're going to need some various sculpting tools or smoothing tools. And then for some texturing, you may need some markers or pens, not so much to mark with, but for pressing into the clay on the helmet here when we sculpt out more details into the helmet. And you can use various different sizes of pen caps that will work. All right, let's get down to this. Let's start out with sculpting out our axe that we created out of the paper mache. This is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to start out with just applying a thin layer of the paper mache clay to the actual blade or axe blade itself here. And I'm going to do that front and back on this. Alright, so I took the time, I applied a thin layer of clay over both sides of the axe blade itself and where it connects to the handle. And as usual, I'm going to take my paper mache paste and I'm going to go in here and use my brush with my paper mache paste to help smooth that clay out. Alright, so I've applied the clay to the axe head, smooth that out, and I'm going to go ahead and set this aside in front of a fan, of course, to dry. And once that's dried, I can go in and sculpt over the handle. But you can't really do this all in one sitting. I mean, I guess you could, but it would be really hard to handle if you're going to sculpt the whole thing, because you're just going to end up displacing clay where you don't want it to be displaced. So I have this little tiny jar here. I'm just going to sit that just like that so that the wet clay isn't touching anything. And I'm going to sit it in front of a fan. And probably by tomorrow morning, that's going to be dry enough for me to go in and sculpt out the handle. All right, let's get back to our troll here. I think the first thing that I want to do with this guy is I want to go in and apply some details into his helmet. And the way that I'm going to do that is first, I'm going to go back to my paper mache clay and I'm going to start forming coils. So just the round, just with my hands forming a coil with small bits of clay at a time, and just first around the brim here of his helmet. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that all the way around the front, the sides, and the back. That's the first thing that I'm going to do. Okay, so I've gone in and I applied another layer of clay around the brim of his hat or his helmet all the way around. And I smoothed it out with paste and a paintbrush. Make sure that you are using enough of the paste and kind of blending it in. It doesn't have to be blended in perfectly. Like if you want to have that definition where it looks like it's a separate piece of the helmet, then don't blend it in completely. But make sure you do have enough paste in there and around that area so that that wet clay will adhere to your dry clay that was already on your helmet. Now if you want to add some texture, make it a little bit more interesting, you can take the tip of a pen and you can make little indentations using a tip of a pen. I have this little clay tool that I use, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just press in some little dots or something to make the helmet a little bit more decorative. I'm gonna go ahead and do that all the way around the helmet. Okay, I took the time and I put my little marks in the brim of the helmet there, as you can see. Again, it's not perfect. I'm really at this point trying to kind of just plow through this tutorial to get this finished for you guys. You will probably end up taking more time on yours and put in as much detail or as little detail as you want. So at this point we're going to go ahead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put sculpt in another decorative piece right along the center of his helmet. So I'm going to start out just by taking some bits of my clay here. I'm not necessarily going to make a coil with this. I'm just going to take a piece, and you can make this as thick as you want or as thin as you want, or not put it in there at all. That's completely up to you. But I'm just laying in the clay, and basically it's going to be if you want to consider it a stripe, I'm going to put in a 3-dimensional stripe all the way across the helmet, just with some bits of clay. And this is going to give this helmet more of a 3-dimensional look to it. And it will make it a little bit more decorative as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way across. So I laid that in. As you can see, it does stick up from the surface of the helmet a bit. And once again, I'm going to go in here with my paste. And I want to apply paste, smooth it out, but also I'm making sure that around the edges here, I'm applying a good amount of paste, again, so that this wet clay will adhere and bond to that dry clay on the helmet. So make sure you're taking the time to do that. Put in a good amount of paste in there around your edges so that you'll get a good bond with the dry clay. Alright, so got my paste applied to there, and I'm just taking my little my handy little plastic sculpting tool, and I'm smoothing it out, and I'm also pressing it down so that it's not rounded. I don't want it to be round. You can leave it round, but the reason I'm not going to leave mine rounded and I'm pressing it and kind of flattening it out a little bit is because I want to go in and put a texture in there using a pen cap. And in my opinion, it's just easier to do if it's flatter. The other thing I'm doing is I'm kind of reforming and reshaping it a bit on the sides. So I've taken the time to do that. And I'm going to lay in some texture here, and I'm using a pen that I have taken apart, and I'm going to use this portion of the pen, but you can use any like pen cap or anything like this. I just happen to have this here, and I kind of like the size of it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to press in these little features here. I think it'll lend it a little bit more interest. And then when I go to paint it, that'll stand out. Makes it look a little bit more decorative. But this is just a pen that I've taken apart. Just kind of going back and looking at it. See if I need to press them in any deeper. Some of them it looks like I do. But there you have it. So little things like this come in handy. And you know, if you're like me and you know you have these virtual work meetings, you know, by the time they're 10 minutes into these work meetings that I have to attend for my job, I've already taken my pen apart and lost the spring before I can take any notes. But anyway, there you have it. So that's pretty much all that I'm going to do as far as anything more on this helmet. I think it has enough detail, but you could do as much or as little with it as you want. And I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and sculpt over these horns, and I want to get these horns as smooth as I possibly can to give it a little bit more contrast from the rest of the helmet, so that it does look a little bit more like a horn. I may have to go back after it dries completely and use some fine grained sandpaper and sand it over. That's the other really cool thing about paper mache clay, is that you can sand it and make it even smoother after it's dry. So we're going to go ahead and carry on here, and I'm going to apply some clay over both of these horns. Alright, so I've applied my clay to both of my horns all the way around. And as usual, I'm going to go ahead with my paste and my paintbrush, and I'm going to start applying and smoothing out the horns. And I am adding, as I'm applying the paste, I'm applying some pressure with the paintbrush. That helps it to get these surfaces a little bit more smooth than just brushing on the paste and then trying to smooth it over. And with these horns, like I mentioned before, I want them to be as smooth as possible, so that it does have the illusion of a completely separate element to it in comparison to the rest of the sculpture. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to do that on both of my horns all the way around. And then I'm going to, because this is a round feature on it, I'm going to use my plastic spoon, the back of my plastic spoon, to go in after that and smooth it out even more. Okay, so I have these horns as smooth as I'm possibly going to get them using the techniques with this particular material here, the paper mache clay. Again, after they dry, I'll probably go in with some fine grain sandpaper and sand them to make them even smoother. But now we're at a point where we're going to go ahead and move down. We're going to concentrate on claying over the arms, building them up, sculpting in maybe like an elbow, more of a maybe a little shoulder area. So that's what we're going to move on to next. All right, arms. I think I'm going to start with this one here. And I'm just going to start applying some clay over the entire arm. When you come to the wrist area where it's been glued in, you do want to apply some of the paper mache clay over that that area where it meets the arm, and it might fight you a little bit because paper mache clay doesn't particularly like to adhere or to stick to polymer clay, but you do want to make sure that you get just at least a little bit at that juncture where the hand has been glued in to the arm. I'm going to turn this guy here. I'm going to apply in the crease here of, I guess where his armpit would be if he was human. Now, depending on how big you want your arms, I mean, you can really bulk these things out with clay and make them quite large. Be mindful of the work that you've done on the helmet and the horns, not to try to refrain from grabbing onto them. That's where the ears, when you hang on to the ears, that'll help you. Now, I don't think I want to bulk up my arm here any more than what it is. I'm going to leave that like that. But I think what I do want to do is I want to add just a little bit more clay to kind of build up like where an elbow would be, I guess. So I'm just putting like a little bit more clay, like a half a ball of clay in that area to bulk that out a little bit. Give him, you know, sort of the, if you're thinking about your arm, you know, that's where your elbow would be, and he's kind of like this. So I'm just giving him a little bit more of a definition of an elbow. That's all that I'm doing. You don't have to do that, of course. You can just lay on some clay and call it done. But so I've got the clay laid onto one of the arms. I'm going to lay clay onto this other arm, do the same thing, build up a little elbow area. But I think also what I want to do here is in this area, maybe build up a little bit more clay to give it a little bit more of a definition. Make it a little thicker in that area for kind of like a shoulder. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just adding a little bit more bulk here around that area to give it the impression of having a bit of a shoulder. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead again with my paper mache paste and my paintbrush and smooth this out. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other arm the same way. I went in, sculpted over the arms, bulked up a shoulder area, little elbows there. And one thing that I want to tell you guys is that when you're applying the clay, really make sure you're taking your paste with your brush and blending in your wet clay, kind of feathering it in to your dry clay, so that when it dries, it looks like it's a cohesive piece instead of these separate elements, it'll look more like a cohesive piece. But anyway, there you have it. There are the arms. Those are sculpted out. And last thing we're going to do now in this section of the tutorial is we're going to go in and we're going to cover and clay over and sculpt out some more definition onto his feet. All right, with the feet, let's just take 1 foot at a time here and start claying those over. The bottom we did, bottom of the feet was one of the first things that we did. So that's already clayed over and completely dry, obviously. And I'm just taking bits of my clay and I'm going to go ahead and just start laying it over on each toe. And with like the actual tip of the toe here, I'm going to apply just a little bit more of the clay to bulk that up so that, let me turn it this way, so that the tip of the toe is raised higher than the rest of the foot or the rest of the toe. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to just keep plugging away at it. Little bits at a time, just like that. Applying them over my my little toes. Alright, I've clayed over both of my feet here and the toes and bulked up the tips of the toes there. And again, back to the paper mache paste. I'm going to go ahead and start applying the paper mache paste over the wet clay, and on the sides I'm going to spend particular amount of attention so that I could get the wet clay feathered and blended in to that dry clay. So make sure that you are doing that again so that it looks like it's a more cohesive piece and not separate elements that you have sculpted in various stages. So that's the idea. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and smooth these out. I'm applying a little bit of pressure as I'm smoothing it out with my brush and the paste. Alright, got the feet in there, sculpted in, smoothed over, blended as well as I could get it into the dry clay. There's probably a couple areas where I could probably do better. I'm looking at it. Take your time on this step. Make sure that you're blending it in. There's really only a couple of small, minute little details that I want to put in here. I think I want to redefine just a little bit in here between the toes. Just sort of like that. Nothing spectacular. Just go in there, redefine the areas in between his toes. And then I think the very last thing that I want to do is put more of a definition of a toenail. And again, you can use a pen like a Sharpie to press in that detail, or something small and concave like this little tool right here. But you could take the tip of your Sharpie and just press in the tip of the toe there. And that's going to give you an indentation of where a toenail would be, basically. Just like that. Nothing spectacular. just a little tiny, minute little detail. I'll go in around there and clean that up just a little bit. They're troll feet, so I mean, you know, we are in there. So again, at this point, and I cannot stress this enough, if you have like a small box fan or something like that, put it in front of a fan, let this dry thoroughly and completely before you move on to the next step, which the next segment of this tutorial is going to be the last segment, and that's going to be painting. So, but you want your sculpture to be completely and thoroughly dry before you apply paint. Alright guys, that's a wrap for this segment of the tutorial. We have one more segment left. That's going to be painting. Thank you for sticking in there with me, and we'll catch you in the next one.